Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and roll up our sleeves and dive into this here today. Thank you for taking the time to join us. We're going to be spending the next 35 or 40 minutes hopefully rethinking employee engagement. Internal engagement, employee engagement are used synonymously, and there are a host of strategies and tactics in regards to people strategies, recruitment strategies, retention strategies, culture management, things that we'll be discussing for the purposes of improving employee engagement to reap tremendous external success for your business. I think one of the things that Owen will help connect the dots with here today is how every resource, every hour, every dollar that we spend dialing up our internal engagement or employee engagement is not just personally satisfying because we're dealing with people and people's lives and being very human, but it's also professionally rewarding and will demonstrate how the most successful companies on the planet have made this a big priority. Our guest speaker here today is Owen Reeder. Owen has been affiliated with our firm for about 5 years now, and I have personally witnessed the impact that he has made as he's gone into organizations and consulted with senior leaders on things that are required to properly inspire and rally their troops and to get really the company's most important assets, which are its people, to become its most beloved fanatics. It's very difficult for a cult brand to reap any benefits of external engagement if the internal people aren't properly lathered up and excited about what the brand believes in, what its purpose is, and what its objectives are. Peter Drucker, who is one of my favorite business thought leaders of all time, is a big advocate of business strategy and execution, and he has lots of advice, lots of books, dozens of them, about how businesses can succeed faster. And Peter Drucker is quoted as saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I love that idea of a person who is as commercially hard-nosed as he is, somebody who counsels with CFOs and CEOs on a daily basis, has prioritized culture above strategy and above execution as things that firms need to pay a lot of attention to if they want to achieve their goals. So with his endorsement, we're going to jump into it and turn the time over to Owen. At the end of the session here, all of your phones have been muted so that we don't hear your background noise, but at the end of the session we will be facilitating some questions. There's both a chat box and a question box on your control panel. Please submit your questions through the question panel, and we'll get to those in about 30 minutes. So with no further ado, the one and only Owen Reeder.
Thanks, Chris. That's just about the nicest thing anybody has ever said about me, to or behind my back. So today I'm going to spend, as Chris said, a little bit of time talking about employee engagement. This has been a key focus for me throughout my career. It's something that I'm extremely passionate about helping our clients here at Cult to achieve. For the reasons that Chris mentioned. Number one, I think we all have, as business leaders, a responsibility to improve and positively impact the people that we work with. But number two, I think that this truly is one of the clearest paths to profitability and sustainable competitive advantage for organizations in this day and age. Our organization has spent a lot of time studying the most cult-like brands across North America. And there have been several consistent factors that we have identified that have helped brands like Harley Davidson or Lululemon or other brands that have fanatic followings, help them to achieve their beloved status. There's 6 factors, in fact, and we're going to be focusing today on one factor of those 6 that has come up time and time again, and that is their people. Employee engagement, it's not lost on me that this is a topic that is arguably overhyped at the moment. And I think that that's good news and bad news. The good news is that people are becoming aware that this is something that's worth investing both time and effort as well as significant resources in. But the bad news, as we'll discuss, is that despite the hype, most organizations are getting it wrong. Over the next 30 or so minutes, I hope to do 3 things. I'd like to make you smile is the first one. Hopefully I just did that. But the other 2 things are more important. Number 1 being to explain why this is an important focus for organizations in 2017 and beyond. And number 2 is to provide some of Cult's insights into how firms can ensure that the investments that they do make in their people actually pay dividends. First, let's make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. What is employee engagement? The author Kevin Kruse defines this as the emotional connection an employee has to the organization and its goals, resulting in the use of discretionary effort. That's a pretty solid definition. If we break it down, there's 3 important things here. Number 1, they're emotionally invested. Number 2, they are aligned with and understand the organizational objectives. And number 3, they expend discretionary effort. I would say that there's a 4th ingredient that is as important as the other 3, and that is that employees that are engaged are willing to say positive things about the business. Essentially, they would act as, engaged employees act as brand ambassadors for their employers, helping to spread the gospel, if you will, not only about what makes their company so great to work for, but to buy from as well. Highly engaged workforces create essentially an army of non-commissioned salespeople that evangelize the brand throughout every moment of their lives. Let's talk a little bit about the benefits of an engaged workforce. There are many, but we'll focus in on 3 here. And number 1 being that discretionary effort that employees expend for their employers has a direct impact on both growth and profitability. Number 2, it significantly reduces the cost of hiring through both reduced turnover and increased employee referrals. And then finally, while it seems a little bit surface level, it is important. It has an impact on productivity and profitability. Highly engaged workforces are shown to reduce the number of sick days and absenteeism within a cohort. On the other hand, employee disengagement is estimated to cost organizations between $450 and $550 billion per year, and that figure is in the U.S. alone. So this is clearly an important topic. Don't take my word for it. I hope to bring some numerous examples over the next 30 minutes to explain why this is important and why we're not the only ones saying it. Up on the screen right now is a chart of a mutual fund called the Parnassus Endeavor Fund. This used to be known as the Parnassus Workplace Fund. It's a mutual fund that was born out of an interest in testing the long-term performance of businesses that put an emphasis on the well-being and job satisfaction of their employees, essentially comparing organizations like Costco, for example, that tend to pay their employees higher, give them additional benefits, paid time off, things of that nature, versus their competitors like Walmart, who typically pay towards the bottom of the pay band within their space. Over a 5-year period, a 10-year period, this fund has generated an average of 10.81% return on investment. They beat these organizations combined beat the benchmark by almost 3 times. Consider that for a moment. This is a fund that's made up of companies that pay their employees better than their peers. They offer better benefits, health care and whatnot, and consider the values and interests of their employees as they make significant investments. They do this all to ensure that their people enjoy their jobs and have a high degree of job satisfaction. And all of those costs, at least on the surface, appear to erode the bottom line. You could probably get away with paying them $1 or $2 less per hour, which has a huge impact across a large organization. But they don't. They don't erode the bottom line. They improve the profitability of these firms, and they help them not just to be competitive, but to vastly outperform the rest of the market. This isn't new. This isn't really that new of a topic. I actually think that a lot of organizations understand the benefits of an engaged workforce. And this topic has been in vogue for some time now. We're seeing more thought leaders publishing articles on the subject. We're seeing major research being conducted by firms like Gallup or Pearson. And there are countless books on the subject, and of course, wonderful webinars like this one. But perhaps the biggest indicator that people are starting to take this topic more seriously is that the total North American investment over the last 5 years is over $4 billion. That's $4.5 billion that is invested in employee engagement. Good news, right? Well, I'm actually a little bit torn by this number. On the one hand, employee engagement has been a critical focus of cult's practice from the very beginning. And from our perspective, I'd say that this is an indication that organizations are finally deploying capital in areas that actually matter, rather than relying solely on mass media and promotions to achieve growth targets. But on the other hand, North American organizations pissed away nearly $200 billion in 2016 alone on mass advertising. So $4.5 billion is a lot of money, but we also have a really long way to go. So this isn't really a good news story, and we're not here to talk really about the success of that $4.5 billion as much as we're here to focus on how little it did. Over that same period, we saw a net effect in employee engagement across the workforce of 0% change. There was no measurable improvement in employee engagement, despite what is a significant investment from organizations across North America. In fact, I think that there's probably signs that things are getting worse rather than better. We're dealing with a new employee paradigm. Employees tend to or typically move to a new job, at least on average, every 4.4 years. The millennial generation now makes up the largest portion of the workforce. And this is a generation that expects brands to interact differently and makes their buying and preference decisions in a completely new way. And let's be honest, the idea of a career is something that most people don't consider anymore, at least the way that they used to. The good news, though, if there is good news here, is that there are brands that are getting it right. There are organizations that are managing to get the most out of their employees and are enjoying the elusive benefits of a hyper-engaged workforce. I think the other encouraging thing is that as we've studied them, there are distinct differences in how these organizations approach the challenge of engaging their employees from the organizations that have seen little to no change despite significant investments. If we dissect, and what we're going to do for the remainder of this webinar is dissect the approach that these brands have on personnel engagement, and we have found that there are three key things that they do differently from their mediocre peers. The first thing is that they treat their employees in a fundamentally different way. This is a picture of, I think, how most organizations view their workforce. It's either numbers on a spreadsheet, or it's sort of like a robot army just getting paid to do their bidding. Even the term human resources is poorly named. We can't treat people as resources in much the same way that we can't treat customers like bank accounts. People in general relate to brands in increasingly different ways than they used to, and sweeping commoditization in most industries and an ever more connected population has led to these new expectations that people have towards companies as these brands vie for their attention and preference in the marketplace. Traditional HR activities like benefit administration, risk mitigation, and performance reviews have proven to be ineffective at engaging the most desirable employees. In just the same way that traditional advertising activities have proven to be ineffective at building any kind of preference or advocacy. So lazy marketing tactics like promotions, buy one, get ones, and weekly offers may see a momentary uplift in sales, but don't produce any sort of long-term effect for the business. Similarly, poor HR practices may see short-term or short-lived improvements in either recruitment or in employee retention, but the long-term benefits of a hyper-engaged workforce are not won this way. Employees are customers. Their successful brands treat their employees the same way that they treat customers. They market to them in ways that they market to external audiences. And it makes sense. These are people that interact with your brand with the most frequency out of anyone out there. Even your most loyal customers don't spend, 8 hours or 10 hours a day at a desk in your office, most likely. And so if you think about it in terms like that, I think there's an argument that can be made that your employees should be treated at least as good as you would want them to treat your best and most loyal customers. Zappos is a company that, or an organization that I think understands this principle, and they are a brand that has seen the benefits of a hyper-engaged workforce in a highly commoditized space. Zappos offers remarkable work experiences, inclusivity of culture, freedom in roles, and an extremely innovative organizational structure called holacracy that allows for increased collaboration and communication amongst all employees, regardless of seniority or tenure. Zappos expects you to be yourself when you come to work, not to try to be something that the organization is trying to mold you into. You can't do a presentation on employee engagement and culture without a picture of a foosball table, but I put this up here for a different reason, and it's fairly important. Foosball tables are not going to improve your culture. Zappos is a great example of an engaged workforce, but there's a major misperception amongst most HR and culture culture professionals as to what it is that makes them great. It isn't the touchscreen games in the elevators or the wacky desk designs or the doggy daycare that makes their culture powerful and their employee engagement off the chart. And this is something that I think this is an example of sort of the copycat game that's happening as people try to emulate brands that do a great job without actually digging in to understand what it is that makes their cultures remarkable. Failed employee engagement strategies are typically the result of an organization failing to identify the real cause of disengaged employees. And as a result, business leaders tend to treat the most immediate and apparent undesirable symptoms of a low engaged workforce rather than taking the time to actually understand what the problem is. It's like treating symptoms instead of treating a disease. High employee turnover, let's try a recruitment campaign, or let's give everyone raises, or modify our benefits package. Even worse, let's try a new ping pong table or a foosball table. This is akin to a doctor prescribing painkillers for a brain tumor. It's not going to help the problem, but maybe the headaches will go away for a little while. A very critical and analytical approach to employee engagement is required in order for any meaningful benefit to be seen. In our experience, I think an outside perspective is helpful here. I think that leaders are often too close to the issues to be able to truly identify root causes. But whether your organization does it with an internal special ops team or with outside help, time and effort needs to be invested into actually understanding what the root causes are of poor engagement. Maybe my favorite example of this is Starbucks. When Howard Schultz returned to Starbucks in 2008, I think it was, he came into an organization that had been languishing with a disengaged workforce for years. Smaller boutique coffee shops were eroding the market share of Starbucks on a very localized level. Upon Howard's return to the company, one of the first things that he did was he closed 7,100 stores in order to recalibrate and retrain staff. 7,100 stores just closed. Essentially, his goal was to create an army of ambassadors that were truly aligned with the company's goals and values, ready to go out and revolutionize the in-store experience for their local patrons. But he didn't stop there. Understanding the shared values of his employee group, Mr. Schultz made other sweeping changes to the organization, increasing base pay for frontline staff, introducing a comprehensive employee health care or health insurance policy, something that is unheard of in the space. Pardon me, I'm just a little dry here. And he started a scholarship program that allowed employees to pursue their academic interests, all while working for the company. Maybe the most radical thing that he did was he invested $35 million into what he called the Leadership Lab, essentially a training campus that it was meant to indoctrinate managers in the Starbucks way, enabling them to go back to their stores and then share that renewed commitment with other team members. The punchline here is simple. The brands with the most highly engaged workforces don't achieve their advantage with superficial perks like beer Fridays and ping pong tables and foosball tables. They make significant investments in meaningful areas, but only after taking the time to truly understand the people who they employ. This is a picture of obviously Joe Biden here. I had the opportunity to hear him speak this year at South by Southwest. I learned a lot. I didn't actually know a lot about Joe Biden previous to hearing him speak, but I understand now that he declined the opportunity to run for the presidency or for the nomination, at least, in this past election, because he has committed his life for the time being to what they're calling the cancer moonshot, the goal of curing cancer worldwide. It's a massive goal, and I got a chance to hear him talk about sort of how he arrived at this goal for his life, or at this purpose for his life, and I was blown away by two things. Number one, I was blown away by just how clear his purpose was to himself. He just knew what he was put on earth at this time to do. And number two, the second thing that blew me away here was how inspiring he could be delivering a message to a group of strangers using that clarity of purpose. And this brings us to the final and I think arguably the most important distinction between brands that are successful at engaging their employees and ones that are not. It has to do with purpose. The most successful brands achieve alignment and buy-in internally through a clearly communicated and compelling purpose. The ethos that drives these businesses gives them a sustainable competitive advantage that allows them to win not only with their customers, but with their staff as well. If you think about it, these are businesses that are winning, and they're winning bigly in highly commoditized spaces with little to no product-based differentiation whatsoever. One of the exercises that we do here at Cult when we're helping organizations to clarify and communicate their purpose is we'll have everyone sit down around the boardroom table and individually write down the purpose of their organization. We give them about a minute or 2 minutes to do that. We don't let them think too long about it because this should be something that's fairly easy to recall. Once they've had those 2 minutes, we ask them to share them. We put them all up on the whiteboard. And this is with typically the leadership, the C-suite and senior level managers at the organizations we work with. And I would say that in at least 50% of the times we've ran through this exercise, we end up with drastically different purposes described in drastically different contexts on the whiteboard. And if you think about that, you know, if there's that much lack of clarity amongst leadership, chances are there is zero clarity amongst the bulk of the staff. And consequently, it's likely that most employees treat this as a job, not as a mission. We need to have the kind of clarity that Joe Biden has in order to use purpose for what it's meant to be used for, which is to inspire. Your purpose needs to be clear. It needs to be pervasive. It needs to be relevant to the majority of your company. And it should be constantly reinforced in order to inspire your staff. And your values need to flow out of your purpose as an organization. And I'll recognize here quickly, I know that whenever somebody starts talking about corporate values, at least half of the audience is going to roll their eyes. And I get it. I understand why we roll our eyes. I'm guilty of it at times myself. Most of the time, values are written down in some dusty old onboarding manual and are at best given lip service and then tucked away, never to be consulted again. But while they may get paid lip service, they have no real bearing on how a business conducts itself on a day-to-day basis. But I think they're important here. Values, when crafted correctly and when communicated broadly inside of an organization, serve as a lens through which employees make decisions every single day. Decisions on how to treat each other, how to treat customers, how to approach challenges, and how to drive the business forward rather than just to do their job and collect a paycheck. Values, or the term corporate values, I think is something that people often misdefine. The corporate in corporate values doesn't refer to corporation, as in this corporation values these things, as much as it does, as much as the word corporate means shared. Corporate implies shared or common values. These are values that are broadly held by a group of people, which helps to create unity and, most importantly, alignment across the organization. The most successful organizations hire against their values. They use them as a lens to ensure that people are the people that they bring into the organization at every level, from frontline staff to management to senior level people. They're people that subscribe to the same set of ideals that the rest of the employees do and that the company does as a whole. And they don't just hire for them; they should fire for them as well. Ensuring that individuals that don't subscribe, that don't buy in to the purpose and the values of the organization, are quickly removed. This is Jim Collins. He's the author, or one of the authors of the book Built to Last. It's one of my favorite books, actually, and he studied a number of companies that have managed to succeed over a long period of time, and he compared them against companies, relevant competition that has not seen the same level of success, to see what is different between these remarkable companies and their mediocre peers. I like the way that they describe it in the book. He describes it that successful organizations are so committed to their purpose and their values that individuals that don't conform are ejected like a virus. We need to take the time to define our purpose as a business and take the time to craft the values for our organizations to share. Once we do that, we need to spend time making them real and making them pervasive throughout every level of the business. We need to hire for them. We need to fire for them. We need to recognize and reward individuals that are bringing them to life. And we need to keep these things at the center of our organizations, not on the shelf in a dusty old three-ring binder. Another quick case study here is Whole Foods Market. Whole Foods, just like the previous examples, their people, more so than their products, provide them with their competitive advantage. Co-founder and co-CEO John Mackey places a huge priority on the purpose of the organization in how it aligns and inspires the staff. But it doesn't just stop. It doesn't stop there. Knowing that employees are fully bought into the purpose of the company, Whole Foods entrusts them and empowers them to make critical merchandising decisions for their local markets in alignment with the core values and the noble ethos that the business has. This, in essence, creates a positive feedback loop of commitment to the brand. You understand the values, and then you are given, you're empowered to live them out as you see fit, and then you buy in again, and then you do, and it continues to cycle until they have essentially a group of fanatics employed in each of the stores across the country. Now, trying to empower an unaligned and uninspired workforce to make more and more important decisions could be disastrous, which is why most businesses, I think, rely on deep and complicated organizational structures and multiple layers of management and protocol and policing. But the benefit of an engaged workforce can truly be unleashed with this kind of approach, allowing organizations to be more nimble, more innovative, and responsive to customer needs. I want to share one more story about purpose because I think it is the most important difference between organizations that manage to engage their workforces effectively and ones that tend to waste money on fruitless efforts. And many of you will probably have heard this story before, but it's such a concise example of purpose being pervasive throughout an organization that I think it bears repeating. During a visit to the NASA Space Center, I think it was President Kennedy noticed a janitor carrying a broom. And he interrupted his tour to talk to this fellow and said, introduced himself, "Hi, I'm Jack Kennedy," and asked him a little bit about what he was doing. And the janitor had a very concise answer for him. "Well, Mr. President," he said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." Purpose is one of the most powerful tools a brand has. When you can start to clearly articulate it and properly inspire employees with it, you will start to see the dividends of a hyper-engaged workforce. Whose job is it, though? I think for years, this has been a job that has fallen to HR professionals. And unfortunately, I think that the traditional HR role is ill-suited to meet the needs of an engaged workforce. And this is by no means to downplay the importance of HR. I think it is a very important role, but it is a role that centers around things like risk mitigation, managing pay bands and salaries, union negotiations, etc. Those are all very important things, but I think that marketing professionals are likely better suited to handle this challenge for two reasons. Marketing improves profitability, or at least it should. And this is one of the things that marketers are and should be tasked with. Similarly, employee engagement improves profitability. And I think that this should be one of the measurements that we put marketing departments to, and frankly, marketing agencies to across the board. Secondly, this type of effort requires constant and persuasive approach to communications, not dissimilar to the approach to external-facing communication. And aside from the marketing team, I think that there's another key factor here, and that is that this kind of effort requires a C-suite level sponsor. Ideally, it's the CEO, and that person needs to place a priority on the efforts that are required to achieve success, and knowing that large cultural shifts may be needed, and knowing that those are most effective and in some people's opinions only effective when they're spread intentionally from the top throughout the entire organization. Finally, I'll close with this. It is worth it. A truly engaged workforce will help to improve brand advocacy, help to improve profitability through some of the measures that I mentioned at the top of this webinar, and will help to create a sustainable competitive advantage even in the most highly commoditized spaces. Despite the hype and despite the current statistics, what the current statistics imply, we maintain that when done correctly, these are some of the most important investments that an organization can make, by far more effective than the millions of dollars organizations dump on clever ads or impotent promotions that erode margins and erode brand values. that is everything that I wanted to get across here today. I think I'll hand the control over to Chris here, and we can take questions that come through.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. We have about 10 minutes for those that want to submit some questions through the question box of the control panel. To get started, first of all, I just wanted to clarify. I think you said bigly at one point during your webinar, and do you want to maybe retract that, or are you going to stick with that? This is bigly.
I'm going to let that one ride. I think
that's it.
Let it ride.
Why do you think that Zappos and Starbucks remain the poster children for culture-led, successful companies, even though in both cases those case studies are 10 years old now? What's the next company that should be heralded for being great because of its emphasis on internal engagement?
Well, I think that those organizations remain good standards and good case studies because they've maintained a commitment from the highest levels of the organization. These are efforts that are sponsored by the CEOs of those companies, and oftentimes as these organizations have transitioned to success, it has been the sole focus of those business leaders in every element of their day-to-day role. So I think that they're relevant examples because the leaders of those businesses keep them relevant. In terms of new players, I'm really interested to see what happens with Uber. I think a lot of people have kind of given Uber written Uber off a little bit from a cultural perspective, but I think that that's a brand that's disruptive and in an interesting enough space that if they can catch up to themselves, they can make some interesting changes. I'm not going to make a bet here on this webinar that is going to be an incredibly engaged and healthy workforce in the next 12 months. But I think that they're an organization with resources and have faced very abruptly the realities of what an unhealthy and unengaged workforce looks like. So to be clear here, I'm not endorsing Uber's current cultural state, but I am interested to see where they go from here.
Thank you. Murray Clark was asking a question about how when your interpretations of the executive and their actions or behaviors do not align with what the stated company values are, how do you respond? What are your options when there's that kind of disconnect at the top?
That's a great question, and it's something that we've faced in the past as well. I think number one, I would say there's three things. Number one, you vote with your and employees vote on a day-to-day basis with where they spend their time. So if an organization doesn't align, or if an organization's values don't align with you, or leadership doesn't align with you, I think that the best, what inevitably will happen, maybe not the best thing, but what inevitably will happen is people will leave. I think that needs to be communicated to leadership, and I think a healthy tenet of good culture is an ability to communicate through multiple levels of management in an organization directly to senior leadership if needed. But oftentimes those things are not possible. Sometimes it's not possible to leave your job, and sometimes it isn't possible to communicate directly with the offending parties. In cases like that, I think one of the things that we've explored and have seen in other organizations is these sort of cultural hubs, if you will, where someone who does care about engagement of their direct reports or of their sort of cohort of employees, when someone does care about the culture and engagement of that group, they intentionally live out those values time and time again and create almost these sort of hyper engaged hubs within an organization in an effort to shift the way that an organization works and the way that people engage back to the brand itself. But it's not ideal. Ideally, there is buy-in and respect for these kinds of things from all levels of management.
Irene asks, I'm an HR professional. Is there anything I should do besides just hand it over to marketing? I don't know if Irene's a little offended at your hypothesis there that this is not best suited for HR professionals, but how would you respond?
Yeah, well, no, my intention here certainly, Irene, is not to offend any HR professionals that are on the line here today. I think there are a few. I think it's our experience that HR people are tasked with a lot of work as it is. I think that they are busy with their day-to-day roles. If you were to have freedom and the autonomy to make changes in this area, then I think the second thing that is required is budget. And marketing teams typically have the highest amount of discretionary budget within an organization to do the kinds of things that are required here, because these aren't necessarily look at Starbucks. There's $35 million spent or invested in a leadership lab. They're not necessarily small figures. So as an HR professional, I'm glad that you're on the call, and I'm glad that these are things that are on your radar. I'd say that you're leading the pack, and I would suggest, if autonomy and budget are not in your control, then a cross-functional team with marketing would be appropriate as well, to try to redeploy some of their existing budget into meaningful areas internally. Most marketing organizations that we encounter, in our estimation, waste quite a bit of money on meaningless or near meaningless media spends or promotions and things of that nature. So if you can achieve some sort of cross-functional team, I think that is one way to approach it. But autonomy and budget are the two biggest concerns, along with buy-in from the C-suite.
A few more questions here. We got about 6 minutes left. You mentioned something about cultural hubs, Owen. What's your opinion about culture committees?
I think culture committees are often kind of confused with party planning committees. I think that oftentimes culture committees get relegated to the task of planning Christmas parties and staff outings and things of that nature. The other problem, I think, with culture committees is that no one owns it. Our opinion here at Cult would be that someone needs to own the task of engaging employees. And a committee, to me, at least I'm not sure how it works at your organization, but a committee to me at least is sort of a bunch of willing bodies willing to do certain things. But this kind of employee engagement requires a significant amount of intentionality and time and resources in order to achieve.
We all, I think, are aware of the WestJet, owners care more kind of mentality. And one of the tactics that they use to boost engagement is to do a very public and lucrative profit sharing program. Do you think that there's a high correlation between engagement and ownership kinds of programs, or is that just one of many things that firms should be thinking about to boost their engagement?
I think that employee engagement is employee ownership is an interesting tactic to achieve this. I don't think it's the only way. There are organizations, there are types of companies that wouldn't make sense for. I think at WestJet it was extremely successful because of the way that they launched their brand. This was a small group of people relative to their peers that all actually did care more and understood the vision of where they were going. So it's a tool in the toolbox that can help with alignment. But that on its own, it's not a silver bullet by any means, in my opinion, to achieve engagement. I think it's one of many things that could be put to use when the situation requires it. And again, going back to the second point, spitballing of different kinds of tactics is sort of what some of the organizations do that fail at this. It really does require a diagnostic-like approach to understanding what the challenges are, what the underlying causes of low engagement are in the first place.
We'll take our last question here. I also just want to remind everybody that much of today's discussion was based off of a white paper around rethinking employee engagement. If you'd like, you can request a copy of that. You can also download it via our website. But we find that these white papers become valuable tools for people that have kind of drunk the Kool-Aid to start a dialogue, to plant some seeds, to socialize, to leave a copy of it on your CEO's desk or on your HR lady's desk or the marketing lady's desk, and ask them to think about if they were doing all that we can and should be doing. So last question, Owen, how have you found is the best way to evaluate team member engagement? What are the metrics, or what's the research that you do to determine if you have a problem or not?
That's a great question. I think that again, I hate to keep saying this, but it certainly depends on the organization. I think in retail situations, it's far different from corporate cultures. But one of the things that we look at is how employees measuring how regularly employees demonstrate living out the values that the company has set out. So this is sort of a recognition and reward for the right kinds of behavior. And I think if you start implementing programs like that, you can quickly measure how active people are in that kind of context. I think another way, in certainly more customer-facing things, is to talk to customers. Employee engagement in a retail situation, for example, is extremely apparent in the way that they relate back to the customers. So those would be sort of two soft things I'd look at. In terms of harder forms of measurement or metrics, certainly employee turnover in large organizations, the cost of hiring, the number of applicants for open positions, things of that nature. I think the latest stat on Zappos, for example, it's actually harder to get a job at Zappos than it is to get into the Harvard Business School. So there are metrics that are sort of lagging indicators that can be used to build business cases around it. But it's certainly a look at the total expense of things in the expense of low engagement, from the cost of hiring and number of sick days and things of that nature, can be used to build business cases for incremental investment in this space, and can then be measured as programs are put into place.
Very good. Okay, Owen, we'll release you, and thank you for the preparation and the time and the thoughts that you've shared, and certainly a giant thank you to everybody who took some time out of their day. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chris.